Tonight, somewhere, someone is about to do something for the first time, and they can't sleep because of it. A job interview, a surgery, a stage. That restless feeling where your body won't let you rest is one of the oldest sensations a human can have. Now imagine that feeling, except tomorrow isn't a performance review. Tomorrow, a man tries to kill you in front of 10,000 people, and you're expected to be entertaining while it happens. This was Tuesday for thousands of young men across the Roman Empire. Not soldiers, not criminals necessarily, sometimes free men who volunteered for this life, and the night before their first fight followed a very specific, very strange ritual, one designed to turn a terrified Chelevek into a spectacle before he ever stepped into the arena. Let's start with where he was sleeping. Beneath the amphitheater, or in a barracks called a ludus, gladiators lived in small stone cells, cramped, dark, barely wider than the body inside them. The most famous training school was in Capua in southern Italy, the same town where Spartacus trained decades earlier. A new fighter's first night in one of these cells wasn't spent in isolation though. Roman tradition had a very specific plan for him. The night before the games, gladiators were led out to a public banquet called the Cena Libera, the free dinner. And free is the key word, because this meal was open to the public. Anyone in the city could walk in and watch the men who were fighting tomorrow eat tonight. Historians studying this ritual have described it less as a gift and more as a spectacle in itself, with the public arriving to watch how the condemned indulged in food and drink the night before the entertainment. Global security. The crowd wasn't there out of kindness. They were there to look at the faces of men who might be dead within a day, to study them the way you'd study an animal before a hunt. The food itself tells its own story. Most gladiators trained on a diet that was mostly grain and beans, so heavy on barley that Roman writers nicknamed them hordearii, barley men. So for one night, the Cena Libera broke that pattern completely. Sources describe tables loaded with roast boar, sausage, fish, figs, and wine, sweetened with honey. Real Roman recipes. Food most of these men would never have touched during months of training. For a slave or prisoner of war who had been counting grain rations for weeks, this must have felt less like generosity and more like a warning. Nobody feeds you like this unless something is ending, and that's exactly the psychology historians point to. Some researchers argue the Cena Libera wasn't really about the gladiators at all. It functioned as advertising, a way to get the city buzzing about the next day's show, to let people go home and describe which fighter looked strong, which one looked afraid, which one barely touched his plate. 2 or 3 days before this, there had already been a procession through the forum. Gladiators marching in a column while boys carried their weapons behind them, and wild animals rattled past in cages. By the night of the banquet, this man's face was already known. Strangers had already decided whether they liked him. Now, picture being the one at that table, not the veteran who's fought a dozen times and knows how to eat and smile and play the part. You, 19 years old, maybe younger. You don't know if you're strong enough. You don't know if the crowd will show you mercy tomorrow if you fall. And you're expected to sit in public holding food you've never tasted while people who paid nothing walk past your table just to look at you. After the banquet, he went back to that stone cell. And this is where the psychological pressure of the night really settles in, because Roman gladiator schools were run with brutal discipline. Trainers called doctores drilled recruits constantly, and new gladiators had already sworn something called the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, an oath binding them to be, in the exact language later writers used, burned, bound, beaten, and killed by the sword if their master demanded it. That oath wasn't a formality, it was the legal contract that turned a man into property that could be destroyed on command. On the night before his first match, that oath wasn't abstract anymore. It was tomorrow afternoon. Sleep, if it came at all, came on a stone floor in a cell built for confinement, not comfort. You can still walk through the surviving gladiator cells beneath sites like the Colosseum today. And what strikes most visitors isn't the size, it's the silence. No windows, no light, just enough space to lie down. Some men in this position likely didn't sleep much at all. Ancient writers describe gladiators in this period as remarkably calm in the face of death, almost unnervingly so. But that calm was cultivated, trained into them the same way their sword work was. Underneath it, physiologically, their bodies were almost certainly doing exactly what yours would do. Elevated heart rate, cortisol flooding the system, the same fight or flight chemistry running through a body that has nowhere to run to. Because here's what made a gladiator's fight different from almost any other kind of violence in the ancient world. A soldier going into battle could look around and see thousands of men on his side, chaos wide enough to hide in, a chance that today might simply not be his day to be noticed. A gladiator had none of that. Tomorrow, it would be him, alone, in a ring of sand, with every eye in the amphitheater fixed on nothing else. Morning came, with a procession into the arena itself, gladiators walking in together before the crowd, sometimes offering the famous line. Historians have long associated with the games a greeting to whichever official was funding that day's spectacle. Then came the Colosseum, a kind of warm-up bout with blunted weapons, letting the newest fighters get a feel for the sand, the light, the noise, before the trumpets signaled that the real fighting was about to begin. And here's the detail that should change how you think about all of this. Most gladiator fights did not end in death. Historians estimate a huge majority of matches ended with one fighter surrendering, raising a finger to ask for missio, mercy, and the crowd or editor deciding his fate. Losing didn't automatically mean dying. Skilled gladiators were expensive to train and even more expensive to replace. So lanistas, the men who owned and managed them, had every financial incentive to keep their fighters alive. Which means that somewhere in that stone cell, on that sleepless night, there was a version of hope sitting right next to the fear. Not certainty of death, but genuine uncertainty about everything, which in some ways is so much harder to sit with. We don't know most of their names. For every Priscus or Spartacus that history remembers, there were thousands of men who fought once, or fought many times, and left nothing behind except a few lines on a tombstone, if they were lucky enough to have one at all. Somewhere in the Roman world, on a night no different from any other, a man lay on a cold floor beneath an arena, listening to a city that had just finished admiring him over dinner, knowing that tomorrow that same city would either cheer his name or watch him die and forget it by dusk. He didn't have a light switch to turn on. He didn't have anyone coming to tell him it would be fine. He just had the dark, the weight of an oath he couldn't take back, and however many hours were left before the sun came up and decided the rest of his life for him.